the American empire is over. We're done. We peaked about 12, 15 years ago, and we are on a down. And it's very hard for the American people, which I understand. I am one. It's hard to get your head around that. We've had a century of on the way up, which is a lot more fun than on the way down. But it does happen to every empire. We're only the latest. Look at the British, how far they've fallen. We're in that process. So the problem with the trickle down is, yeah, there might be more jobs, but they're going to be created in China. They're going to be created in Brazil. They're going to be created in India. They're not created here.
The American empire peaked over a decade ago and has declined ever since. According to economist Richard Wolff, this reality is difficult for many to accept, especially after a century of expansion. Every empire faces this trajectory, and the United States is no exception. The comparison to Britain's decline makes this process easier to understand. While economic policies like trickle-down promise job growth, the reality is that those jobs are being created elsewhere, such as in China, Brazil, and India, rather than in the US. The consequences of this decline are already unfolding, and ignoring them won't change the outcome. Let's dig in to find out more about this.
For at least a century, the Republican Party presents itself in this country as the party against taxes, the party for small government, all of that.
Yeah.
What you see in Mr. Trump is the same old Republican story, but carried much further. It's a little bit like the Republican Party always allowed the Southern white population to leave the Democratic Party and come over. But they didn't pander to white supremacy. Mr. Trump did. You know, the hostility to foreigners that you could get from the Republican Party is taken further. Trump defined himself as different. I'm going to give you more than any Republican ever did, and you've got to let me do more than you might. And so people say that in different ways, but that's the deal. Look, the Democratic Party isn't that different. It also supports private enterprise and capitalism, but it makes the alliance based on a different group of people: women, highly educated people, black and brown people. You know, we all kind of know, if you pay much attention, the Democrats say to the big shots, support us because we will bring in, and they will all, like Nancy Pelosi in that famous moment during the campaigns a few years ago, when she's at a college and a young student stands up and says, to her, what do you think about socialism? They're obviously affected by Bernie and all of that. And she doesn't, you can see the camera's right on her. So she doesn't know quite what to say. And she's fumbling, which she's pretty well spoken, so this was unusual. And finally it comes out. She looks kind of befuddled and looks right at the young man and says, we're all capitalists now.
Wow.
And that she's right. That's exactly, we're all of them, those folks. And their job is to build the alliance that gets you the votes. And so you sit. And when you don't do it well enough, then the other one. Trump comes along, breaks all of this by saying, I'm going way further in building that alliance, and I'm going to get enough people that I'm going to blow the rest of you out of the water.
They're going further and deeper than we've seen in recent years. But how does that jive with the populist promises he made? Again, he's telling lots of people, your life's bad now. It'll get better under me. But if they lose healthcare and high quality medical services, how is their life better?
It isn't. And
how does he sell that, though?
Mr. Trump is well, he sells it to the people. In the end, he has to. That's the employer class. Look, in 2017, when Mr. Trump was president and got them this tax cut, it was then the biggest tax cut we've seen, emphasizing the corporations and the rich. It came at the end of a 40-year period, unequaled in American history, for redistributing wealth and income up, away from the poor, away from the middle, to the Musks and the Bezoses and all of them.
Yeah.
And as an economist, I can tell you, never did we need a tax cut for corporations and the rich less than 2017 when they got it. Now they want to keep it because it had a sunset provision. Now they want to keep it in this year. If he's going to do that, the only way he can deliver to them, or to use his language, I'm going to make you all rich. Exactly. The only way he can do that now is to savage the public sector. Where else is he going to get the money?
They've terminated thousands of contracts, and they're set to lay off tens of thousands of workers in what might be effectively the biggest job cut in U.S. history.
Mm-hmm.
They're not done.
No.
They're setting sights on the U.S. Department of Education.
But again, think like an employer for a minute, even if it doesn't come to you naturally.
Yeah.
It doesn't come to me naturally either. For an employer, this is nirvana because he's not going to have to tax them. Look, he has to deliver that to them. How's he going to do it? He could borrow the money. That's what his predecessors did. But we are now at a level of debt this country has never seen. It's becoming a scary problem because if the rest of the world no longer lends to the United States government to cover its deficits, what are we going to do? Let's remember that for many, many people, you get paid less if you work for the government than if you go in the private sector. And the compensation for that was job security. What Mr. Trump and Mr. Musk are doing, more than what the workers are that they fire, is they've taken that security away. Where do you think public employees are going to go if either they've lost their job, which is happening to tens of thousands, or they're scared silly that they might lose their job? They're going to go into the private sector. Where else are they going to go? Which means they're going to drive down wages and working conditions in the private sector, because the worker who comes from the private sector, laid off after 5-10 years, that means not only your job is gone, your income is gone, but your career ladder has just been yanked out from under you. So you're desperate, you're worried. You will offer yourself one way or another for less money than the person who's in that private sector job now. The American empire is over. We're done. We peaked about 12, 15 years ago, and we are on a down. And it's very hard for the American people, which I understand. I am one. It's hard to get your head around that. We've had a century of on the way up, which is a lot more fun than on the way down. But it does happen to every empire. We're only the latest. Look at the British, how far they've fallen. We're in that process. So the problem with the trickle down is, there might be more jobs, but they're going to be created in China. They're going to be created in Brazil. They're going to be created in India. They're not created here.
Trump's tax cuts, first implemented in 2017, came at a time when corporations and billionaires were already wealthier than ever. Instead of reversing inequality, those cuts further enriched the ultra-rich and widened the gap. Now, Republicans in Congress aim to extend those cuts, which would cost trillions. They're proposing deep cuts to Medicaid, the Affordable Care Act, and other public programs to cover the cost. This means that while Trump promises prosperity, his policies will strip healthcare from millions and gut the public sector, forcing government workers into the private job market, where they will accept lower wages out of desperation. Elon Musk, a vocal Trump supporter, has been brought into the fold to assist in dismantling federal agencies, leading to mass layoffs in sectors like USAID, Veterans Affairs, and potentially the Department of Education. This corporate takeover of public institutions doesn't just reduce government jobs, because it also weakens workers' bargaining power in the private sector. The more people scrambling for fewer jobs, the easier it is for corporations to lower wages and worsen working conditions. Republicans defend this by claiming that tax cuts for the wealthy will create jobs and drive innovation, a version of trickle-down economics that has been disproven repeatedly. Any new jobs created are not in the United States, but in countries like China, Brazil, and India, where corporations can maximize profits. The promise of shared prosperity no longer holds because the American empire is in decline. The US was on the rise for over a century, but that era has ended, and Americans now face the same trajectory as Britain before them. Today's economic choices accelerate that decline, benefiting the ultra-rich while leaving working Americans with fewer options and less security. it's time to grab some bamboo and pandas and dig even deeper.
I know this is difficult for people to hear. This is a cut based on desperation. This is an economy that is indeed, we have the greatest level of corporate debt this country has ever seen, off the chart. The greatest level of personal debt, and we have the greatest level of government debt. Our government debt is now trillions of dollars greater than our annual output. That was not the case in the 20th century. It is the case now. What you're seeing is desperation politics. The whole Trump phenomena ought to say to you, wait a minute. These jerky moves that are out of whack, right? In recent days, we have seen the decision of the Trump administration to kiss the war in Ukraine goodbye. We're not doing that no more because we can't afford it. We can't keep funding a war, which, by the way, the West is losing, as anybody who pays attention knows. All of these things are signs of what? Of a country that is in trouble and is turning on its friends because it can to save itself. We're going to take over, we're going to get your energy for nothing. We're going to, make you build the wall, you in Mexico. Look what the genius in a way of Mr. Trump is that without understanding it, because clearly he doesn't, he feels in his own way, the way lots of people do, that there's something that necessitates going way beyond what has been done because our need as a society is beginning to show up. Look, let me give you a simple example. The best electric vehicles in the world right now, but by uniform global agreement, are produced by something called the BYD Corporation, which probably most folks have never heard of, which is Chinese. BYD, the initials, BYD. They make the best quality, cheapest electric car and truck. All right. You don't see them anywhere in the United States. Why not? Because Mr. Trump put a 27% tariff on them, and Mr. Biden raised it to 100%. So let me give you an example. Wow. If you wanted to buy a $30,000 BYD electric vehicle, which you could do, that's what they charge. That's why it's so good. You would have to pay $30,000 to get the Chinese to ship it here. Then you'd have to give another $30,000, 100%, tariff to Uncle Sam, or in this case, Uncle Don, in the way of a tariff. So it would cost you $60,000, which you're not going to do because you can get a less good Tesla or GM or Ford or anybody else at $40,000 to $50,000, which is less than you'd have to pay. But here's the problem.
I was going to say, because right now this sounds like a good plan to a lot of people. Trump has said, I'm going to do this not just to China, although he's going to double existing tariffs to China, obviously, right. But Mexico, Canada, everybody. If we intensify the tariffs, the scenario you just painted will happen, and people will be forced to buy U.S. stuff. Right. Which then creates U.S. jobs, which again stimulates the economy.
All right, let me be the economist. Okay? That's good for the Tesla company, which I'm sure is purely coincidental, and GM and Ford and the others. Good. And they'll maybe be able to hold on to some jobs. Good. But now let's follow the bouncing ball, because that's my job as an economist. Yeah. Everywhere else in the world, every company in Asia, Africa, Latin America that competes with an American company that has to buy a truck as part of its business will go to China and buy the best truck at the lowest price, $30,000, the best truck. No American company that competes with them will do that. And you know what that means? Those companies will be able to charge a lower price because they have better inputs than the American company, which doesn't. In the long run, that will lose Americans' jobs left and right as they're outcompeted by all the rest of the world that can go and buy, and is buying, BYD trucks. If you go to Europe right now and you go on the auto routes all over Europe, you'll see BYD cars and trucks. America is shooting itself in the foot. It may be great politics for Mr. Trump. I'm helping the auto companies and the workers. Got to come to terms with that, but we are led by people who don't want to do that because nobody wants to be the politician who has to explain to the people it's over.
The United States is running on economic desperation. Corporate, personal, and government debt have reached record levels, and the old economic models that once sustained the country are no longer working. The government now owes trillions more than the entire annual output of the economy. This level of debt was unheard of in the 20th century, but it defines America's reality today. The decisions being made, slashing public spending while maintaining massive tax cuts for the wealthy, pulling back from foreign entanglements not out of strategy but necessity, and turning to economic protectionism, are the hallmarks of a declining nation. The Trump administration's decision to distance itself from Ukraine is just one example of this reality. It is not about shifting foreign policy priorities. It's about the fact that America can't afford to keep bankrolling a war that the West is losing. Trump's economic approach, built on aggressive tariffs and economic isolation, is another symptom of this desperation. The claim is that by raising tariffs on imports, American industries will be protected, American jobs will be saved, and the economy will be revitalized. But that isn't how global trade works. Take electric vehicles. Chinese companies like BYD produce the best, most affordable EVs in the world, but Americans won't see them on US roads because of tariffs that more than double their price. The same principle applies across industries. While Americans are forced to pay more for lower quality domestic products, businesses in the rest of the world will take advantage of cheaper, better alternatives. Asian, Latin American, and African economies will grow stronger while the US falls behind. The global balance of power has already shifted. The G7 nations, once the economic center of the world, no longer hold that position. The combined economies of the BRICS nations, China, Russia, Brazil, India, and others, now surpass the G7 in total economic output. This changes everything. Countries that once depended on Washington or London for trade, investment, and infrastructure projects now look to Beijing and New Delhi. They do so not because of ideology, but because they get better deals. China and its partners offer financing, development, and trade agreements that make more sense for emerging economies. No amount of US military presence in the South China Sea will change this. Economic power, not military might, determines the future, and the US is losing that battle. What's happening now is not a temporary setback, but the natural process of imperial decline. Every empire has gone through this stage, and America is no different. The British once ruled the world, only to see their influence fade as economic and political realities shifted. The same is happening to the United States. The difference is that American leaders refuse to admit it. Instead, they push policies designed to maintain the illusion of strength through economic nationalism, military posturing, or political rhetoric. But none of it changes the underlying reality. The American empire has already peaked, and the world is adjusting. Politicians won't say it because no leader wants to be the one to admit that the best days are behind them. But the signs are everywhere. The economy is held together by debt, foreign policy decisions are dictated by financial constraints, and global influence is slipping away. The rest of the world is moving forward, cutting new deals, expanding trade, and investing in their futures. Instead of adapting, the United States is retreating into an outdated fantasy of economic and military dominance that no longer exists. The question is how long the illusion can be maintained before the American public is forced to accept reality. If you've made it this far, you're officially part of the channel crew. If you want to stay ahead of global events without the fluff, hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and stick around. Just like pandas need bamboo, you need knowledge to thrive. Also, drop your thoughts in the comments. I want to hear what you think. Thank you for watching. I will see you in the next one.